can you explain the new French inheritance laws that came in last year and how they affect French homeowners? Does this mean foreign homeowners are no longer covered by the EU succession regulation?
Okay, so I did just briefly touch on the EU succession regulation a couple of minutes ago. That's a regulation that came into effect in 2015. And in order to explain new inheritance law that came into effect on the 1st of November 2021, we really will need to look back at the impact of the EU succession regulation so that I can explain it. And so you'll have to bear with me a bit on this. The EU succession regulation, which applies to UK nationals, even though the UK is no longer a part of the EU, allows a national of another country to elect to apply the law of their nationality estates to assets in another jurisdiction. That means that English law of inheritance can apply to your home in France. Now, we're, I think, all relatively comfortable that under English inheritance law, we're entitled to leave our estate to anybody we may choose. We're not necessarily obliged to leave it to a spouse or to our children. We could write a will that would leave everything to the cat's home if we wanted, or to a friend down the road, subject to a few very small limitations. Now, clearly, though, that testamentary freedom, as we call it, goes against the grain of the famous French Civil Code, which reserves rights to one's children. So the new law that came into force last year works to state that where a deceased person invoked a law to apply to their inheritance that would go against that reserve that leaves assets to the person's children, then those children are entitled to raise a claim. Now, there are a number of criteria that must be satisfied before any claim could be raised. One being that the testator must be French resident or resident elsewhere in the EU, and at least one of the children must similarly be French resident or resident elsewhere in the EU. If one of those two tests is satisfied, then the notaire is obliged to contact all of the children and ask them if they are happy for a will to be executed, to be implemented. They would then be effectively disinherited. As a classic example, a deceased person may be choosing to leave everything to their second spouse rather than to the children. If the children were not happy with that, they would have a right to claim in liquid form, so effectively cash, against the beneficiary. So it's not going to be setting aside the will, but they have a liquid claim. It does mean in all of that where this is only a holiday home and none of the children resident in France or elsewhere in the EU, then there is complete testamentary freedom as before. So the deceased would have been able to have written a will that would disinherit the children if chosen. And similarly, there is a general consensus that since the new French law goes somewhat against the whole intention of the EU succession regulation, it is likely to be struck out by the European courts at some point in the near future, although that remains to be seen.